Welcome to Hiki-Goma. I'm Elliot. This is my podcast about making manga, sort of the whole sausage from the beginning stage, the writing, directing, whatever, working with artists if you are a writer and not an artist, and then ultimately getting into marketing and publishing. Big kind of news is that I'm publicly releasing the rough art draft of the first chapter of my manga, AEGIS. You can read that below. It's just a Google Drive link. It's completely free. You don't have to fucking sign up to anything. There's no bells and whistles. Bells and whistles isn't the right term. There's no schemes. I'm not doing anything. You can just read it. I'd really appreciate your feedback on it. To be fair, this will be a fairly short window of time. So if you're watching this basically any time after February 2023, then it will already have been finished, and then that link will just be basically a link to the finished version. You can still tell me what you think about that, but it won't be the rough draft version. That's kind of the news. And now I want to talk about the reason why I'm doing that, because that releasing a rough draft of something like this is probably not super common to do publicly. And I kind of want to talk about at least the philosophy behind it, because I don't actually know exactly if this is a good idea. I think it is. I think I have reasonable grounds for it, and I think I've already gotten some, I don't want to talk too scientifically, but I've already got some data back that is good, I think. So, basically, long story short, in the previous episode, I talked about a book/concept called like a lean startup or a lean production process. The bottom line of that is that this whole concept that startups, so things basically, if you define it as something that you're basically trying to make a company, you're trying to make a product where it hasn't really been made before in a sense. You don't really know if there's a customer base for it, if there's an audience. Does anyone want this, and what features do they want, and will they pay for it, and how much will they pay for it? All those kinds of things. It's this kind of whole thing of there's an extreme doubt, and instead of, this is the pitch, right, of this thing, instead of just going, well, we think that customers want this, and we think that, people will want this feature, and we think that they'll want this feature, instead of building up a whole thing and then releasing it to customers, then it turns out potentially that actually no one wanted it. They actually don't give a shit about all the features you love. They don't care about, whatever. Instead of doing that you constantly basically talk with customers and you constantly test your product, and that you start by putting out what they call a minimum viable product. They didn't make that term, but they talk about it a lot. You basically make the minimum possible version of that thing that is acceptable, basically, that sort of, I guess, conveys and or does the general idea of what you're going to give to people. Now that there is a lot of ambiguity there, and there's judgment involved with that, and that is actually something I want to talk about. But that's the idea, right? Sorry, I'm going to start crying. I'm so emotional about this. That's the idea, right, is that you put out something kind of basically a shitty version. You basically put out a shitty version of the thing, and you see what people tell you. And when you think about it in the terms of, why would I want to put out this shitty version of this thing? That doesn't make sense. Why would I, why would I want to associate the brand of this thing that I've cared about for so long, let's say in this case, manga, film script, short film, whatever. Why would I want to put that out to people? And only the first thing that they see is going to be shit. Well, the idea is that really just comes down to, most of the time it just comes down to embarrassment. The thing is, this is kind of the calculation I'm making, right? Particularly with AEGIS. Typically, most people would just share a rough version of a story with close friends and or colleagues. Hey, you work in manga as well. How about we do a script swap? How about we do, a work swap? Or, hey, friend of mine, can you read this thing? Give me some feedback. The thing about that is that, yes, that is useful for, some of those people will give you very good feedback. I've gotten very, very good feedback that has dramatically altered the way I've shaped stories like that, of course. And everyone does. If you ask the right questions and you have the right people who are trusted, they're not just going to blow smoke up your ass or whatever. That can be very useful. However, that is distinct from behavior. It's distinct from I guess what you would technically call customer behavior, which is basically, will they buy it? Will they like it? Will they read it for free? Will they, follow you on a mailing list? Will they buy merch? Not all of those things necessarily, but will they, basically the bottom line is, will they pay for it? That seems to be the main thing for most people. It's fairly important. It kind of keeps the lights on. Not to go into a whole tangent about this, but you basically need money it is essentially a business, unless if you're doing it as a hobby. But again, most people who do things as hobbies, especially something as difficult as making manga, they would rather have it as something that they did with at least more of their time. Typically, I don't know, maybe some people are really interested in just it being some tiny part of their lives. I don't know. I'm not one of those people, so I can't. Who knows? I have never had that experience. Bottom line is that you can get great feedback from people, but it has no bearing. It does not test in any way whether people will buy it. Now, to be fair, if everyone you show this to, even the most cynical person, is raving about how amazing it is, yes, you can probably theorize, okay, this is probably more likely to be, successful. It still has no bearing in terms of scientifically. It's not provable that anyone will pay for this thing. It's not provable that anyone will pay for your thing until someone actually pays for it. And that seems very obvious, right? But the real question is, how early can you have those people, potential customers, how early can you have people do that? I want to make it clear as well, this isn't like some super duper revolutionary thing. People do put out, for instance, early rough art things. They post on social media about stuff, and then they'll have a Patreon, and people will support a Patreon before a single final page is released to them. Sure. The thing is that, at least for me, that was something that I was very opposed to on sort of my principles, in a sense. So it's not as if no one else has ever come to this conclusion before. Lots of people already do this. It's more about, I guess I'm not here to convince anyone, but I guess I want to talk about how I was convinced, I suppose. Like I said before, basically, it really just came down to, my strongest argument against this was, it's just kind of embarrassing, and what happens if it, ruins people's image of AEGIS? Or what happens, this is maybe a little bit more of a legitimate concern, but what happens if I go, hey, big announcement, my rough draft is out. Hey, you can read it. And then, a month later I say, hey, the first finished chapter is out. You can read it. And then those people go, he's announcing this too many times. I'm not going to read it. Even saying that's, anyway. The main thing is that if it sucks, right, these are the two options. For one, embarrassment is just a thing you can get over, especially when the potential benefits are literally like not like a life or death, but it is really like, can I make money? Can I not make money? Those are pretty big deals compared to small amount of embarrassment from posting something online. And furthermore, the embarrassment is presumed in the actual thing being bad, or at least for me, oh no, people will hate this, they'll blah, 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 they'll think it's stupid, they won't get it, they'll not want to read it after this because they think it's poo-poo. The thing is that if it sucks, no one will read it. And that's great, because then when it actually is better, then they will read it, right? Presumably. Or when it's, at the very least, you can take data from the fact that if no one reads it, that's probably a sign, potentially, depends on how you're releasing it, but that can tell you a number of things, at the very least. Maybe it doesn't have an audience, maybe whatever. Chances are you will be able to have someone read it somewhere who is your target audience, and they will probably give you some kind of feedback. Or action, right? If you try to make people pay for a chapter immediately, and no one does, right? That's probably a fairly good sign that, well, that's not even a sign, it's just evidence that people will not pay for your thing, right? That's what I like about this, in the sense that it doesn't really leave, there's not a whole lot of ambiguity. You just get data, right? You just get evidence. Okay, well, if I showed this to 1,000 people and 10 people bought it, and, I made $50 off of those people, well, that's actually not too bad, because then it just means that if that ratio continues, I just have to show it to, 100,000 people to get whatever that is, $5,000, whatever. I didn't do the maths on that, but, it can give you data on that. But maybe if only 0.001% of people give that money to you and it's like your dad or something, then, maybe not a good sign. So the point is that basically, there, at least for me, as far as I can tell, there are not that many great reasons against not releasing this. And long story short, I'd already shown this to just some general kind of, I guess, outside of my immediate circle, just random groups on Discord, manga groups. I shared this in a few Reddits, specifically for like ancient Greek, ancient Rome, ancient history kind of studies things. And again, my whole thing was I'm going to have no presumptions. Just to back this up a little bit, the thing I'm basically specifically testing for, and to be clear, I'm not expecting to get this, is I'm basically testing for, will people sign up to an email list and will people sign up to a Patreon? Am I expecting to suddenly be making $1 bajillion? Am I expecting literally a single person to sign up? No, right? That's not my, I'm not coming in here with an assumption. My actual assumption, right? Sorry to make this clear, there actually is an assumption. The assumption is that no one will actually do that. No one that I don't know. What I'd call like third-party people. Of course, you're always going to have friends and relatives probably going to pitch in money for this kind of thing most of the time. But I doubt that, this is my assumption, I doubt that I'm going to get any third-party people giving me money at this stage. But the thing is that again, that is an assumption, that's a hypothesis, and you want to be able to scientifically test that hypothesis. And the thing is that two states. One is, if I don't release this and I don't set up a Patreon, it is impossible for that hypothesis to be disproven because it's not being tested. If I release something and I, attach a Patreon to it and say, hey, I've got a Patreon, it's got some bonus things, you can sign up to it if you want, and someone signs up to that, or rather that just even being a thing that's possible, means that that hypothesis can be disproven. And obviously you'd want a position where, let's say I give that a 5% chance of happening. I don't know what my percentage, but let's just say I give some third-party person giving me money at this stage. I'd say that's probably a 5% chance of happening. The other one is guaranteed 0%. Here's the thing though, this actually could be closer to 50%. I don't fucking know, because I've just done it. So that's the thing, right? As an example of a hypothesis being disproven, right before I read this book, I actually had but I had a kind of, I just had a discussion with someone about this. This is the person who recommended me this book, and we were talking about, should I release this early? Should I not release this early? I don't know. And I was very firm on, no, I can't release this. It's too early. The art is too rough. People won't understand this, and they won't like it, and they won't be excited about it. Why would they be excited about it? It's just rough art, blah, blah, blah. But then now, right, after I kind of got over that and went, look, I still sort of feel that way. That's still generally my assumption. However, I don't mind releasing this to test this again. If it's actually shit, and if they don't care and they don't understand it, then they're not going to have any reaction, so there's no fucking problem, really. But then I posted this on a bunch of Reddits, and people were like, hey, this seems interesting. Where can I find updates about this? Wow, this is really cool. I don't know, I'm not trying to sell my own thing too much, but that broke my assumption. And it's like, oh, actually I can release this, in a limited function this early, and then that's now leading me to release this. Why am I releasing this, I guess, more and more widely to a public thing? Well, because, at this current time, possibly for quite a long time, there aren't that many people watching this podcast. Probably the people who are watching it are hopefully a little bit more interested in the stuff that I'm doing, or eventually will get more value out of it. They're more likely, or you're more likely, I'm saying there, but I'm obviously talking to you directly. You're more likely, probably, not trying to guilt you into this, of course, but you're more likely to probably read something, or at least give it a go. That's something, again, not to go on a huge tangent, but they talk about this concept of early adopters in that Lean Startup book. Basically, people who are, well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. People who are intrinsically interested in either, in the arts or whatever online stuff, you as a person, they like you as a person, I'll give them a go, whatever. Or, in this case, the reason I posted on particularly ancient Greek, Roman, ancient history subreddits is because, of course, my series is set in those time periods. Those people are probably way more likely to be like, wow, a series, about the Peloponnesian War. Holy shit. Why has someone not made this before? They're going to be way more willing to endure crappy art And I know that for a fact because if I hadn't made this and I saw someone was making a series on this, I would read the fuck out of it, you know. So sort of to sort of tie this together a little bit and make it a bit clearer, because it's all a bit like, you know. And again, this is something I've just read about. I will likely have significantly more nuanced opinions on this when I've actually, you know, tested this significantly more, right? I've only literally just kind of rolled out, right, a minimum viable product. I guess I want to talk briefly. I know I just said I was going to summarize things, but too early for that. I want to talk briefly about what actually makes a minimum viable product. That's something I've been debating in terms of releasing this particular chapter. Without spoiling things, I feel like this is an okay place to end, or as a kind of cliffhanger teaser thing. One of the problems is, though, that this kind of one of the problems in a sense with the whole series is that it wasn't written to have chapter distinctions. It was actually written initially as, for me, almost the first episode in like an HBO series. Sometimes they're a bit longer, maybe they're like an hour and a half, possibly. Long pilot episode. And in my brain, I'm like, okay, well, that's going to be a tankobon. That's basically going to be a graphic novel length opening to the series. And I'm going to write this like a conclusive episode. The problem is that the script ballooned. It was much, much, much longer than I initially... it was the same material, it just took way longer to convey. And now I have about 2, possibly 2.5 volumes worth of content that was actually just meant to be that original volume. So now it's basically an arc rather than just a first like episode per se. So that's one of the problems, is nothing was ever broken into discrete chapters. I'm basically just breaking up big scenes. So one of the problems I have is I feel as if I've got a kind of general pitch, but I haven't really fully conveyed the premise. And my thesis is that really, to be a true minimum viable product, it has to convey kind of the whole premise. So in a sense, this is the first chapter, but in reality, this gets confusing with terminology. What will ultimately be the first chapter will actually be about twice as long, because currently you get more of like a mystery, but in the second chapter, the full-length thing, whatever the fuck, the premise is conveyed in a lot more detail. So while I'm kind of putting this out now, by the way, I'm also putting this out months and months earlier than I thought I would. I thought that I was going to be probably not showing anything from this until we made about 80, 90, 100 pages of this rough. Now I'm putting out, the first 38 pages rough, and that's all we've done so far. So it's a lot earlier than I thought, but really it's actually probably just a little bit too early, because a lot of the feedback I'm getting, or a lot of the commentary, is they're good questions, and they're often they're kind of intrigue-based questions. They're typically less and less they're becoming confusion-based questions. They're becoming, I wonder what this character's thing is, or I wonder what this is, or I wonder where this character is, or that kind of thing. Good kind of mystery things, but ultimately I feel like would be a little bit better if those kinds of questions were answered immediately in a full chapter. It's a little hard to explain this without really going into spoilers for everything, but I just want to convey that there is definitely judgment involved in what is the minimum viable product for your thing, right? So, I mean, if you just made a big deal about releasing the first page rough, the chances are that's probably just not enough, I would imagine, unless if your premise is somehow perfectly conveyed in that first page. Or if you're trying to sell people based on the artwork. Who knows? Personally, that's a little too small for me to truly grip people. But for instance, I'm not against the idea of releasing finished pages one at a time, because in that sense, I feel like that sells the art a lot better. And when the art of a series is very, very good, as I'm, I'm not trying to shill my own series here, but I'm really happy with the art from the artist I have. They've done a very, very, very good job. In that case, people are a little bit more willing to take on a series and give it a go, right, compared to rough art. The counter of that is, if the art is rough, but I'm giving you 38 pages for free and it pitches a pretty decent story, hopefully, then that's kind of the sell. So that's basically the difference, I guess, between those two things. So to summarize, again, effectively, whole idea is you will have assumptions. And in fact, if you don't have assumptions, it actually is really worth writing these down. Writing down what your assumptions are. And even if actually a better term is hypothesis, because that's really what these things are. Oh, people won't like this because of this. People, I can't release it yet because the art's too bad, or I can't do this, I can't do this. Or probably more positive things you assume, like people will pay for this, people like my main character, people, like the premise, people will, read this for free, people, da-da-da-da-da. All hypothetical until it's tested. Again, you don't have to do anything. Lots of people just release a first chapter, fully polished and finished for free online, and it does very, very well. The thing is, though, that personally, I'm not exactly in as comfortable a position to do that because I'm paying for art. If I were an artist and I could truly just make this, out of passion, and it didn't cost me money, and it just costs time, again, very valuable, but still, it doesn't cost me money, it costs me time, that's more viable. For me, though, I would rather know as early as possible the viability of this. And even, for instance, if I can start, getting money and email signups from people before I've released anything, then obviously that's what I would want to do, right? Why would I not, if that's possible, why would I not want to do that, right? So that's the whole premise, is this is a method that I guess allows you to test your assumptions about your series. The chances are, if it is actually shit and no one wants it, then no one will consume it. So you're basically doing something potentially embarrassing in front of no one. Although again, if you're actually trying and failing, I don't really see how that's actually embarrassing. Anyway, that's the whole concept of that. I don't want to be like, wow, I've seen the light. This is some messianic, whatever. I'm having a vision. I'm having a dream sequence. Lean startup is the way to go. These are things that I had already been very concerned about. I'd been wanting to find ways to test. And, really this was just a mental block that I just, I didn't think it was possible to do. And then I realized, actually, no, there are nowhere near as many barriers preventing me from doing this as is possible. But again, I can't speak for certain about these things because, as I'm saying, these are in a sense my hypotheses. However, of course, I've already had nothing cataclysmic has happened. I've actually only had good feedback and results from what I've done so far. So really, it's actually, in a good way, disproven my kind of negative hypotheses of no one will care, no one will like this, everyone will hate this, the art will, be too rough for people to understand what's going on, whatever. And again, the positive is I get to test whether people will do things like pay me money or, do a mailing list for this. And even if they don't, it doesn't mean that that's like impossible. It just means that the testing is open for that. So I feel like I've explained that in a decent amount of detail. Again, if you want to check this out, you can read it in the link below. Most likely, if you're watching this later, it'll just be the finished version that'll just link to the actual first chapter, which again will be for free. I know that I sort of started, if you've been watching other episodes of this podcast, I sort of started by talking more about sort of what I did in the past in terms of my approach with writing. But at this point, this stuff is way, way, way easier and more engaging to talk about because I'm actually dealing with it in real time. So I'll probably continue just talking about this kind of thing and then go back to the other stuff at a later date. But yeah, thanks. Goodbye. Hopefully you enjoy AEGIS. Let me know what you think. And don't feel pressured to to subscribe to a mailing list or subscribe to a Patreon, even though this whole episode is talking about how I desperately need that to feel validated or whatever. Anyway, goodbye.